Okay, we're on. All right, I'm so excited. Everybody. This is going to be great. Oh, God, I'm so excited. Okay, so today I'm here with Ron Crouch, who is Dr. Dad on online. He is super, super cool. Here's a link or a preview of his Facebook here. This is awesome. We just posted this one yesterday about the 9-year-old skeptic who debunked the energy healing, and I thought that was just phenomenal, right? Such a small, easy, simple test. Tell me what hand I'm hovering over. And man, it was phenomenal. So Ron Crouch does this page here, Dr. Dad, Raising Critical Thinkers. He is awesome. He's also an author. He's a child psychologist with his own practice. And wow, we're just super happy to have you here. We're super excited. So welcome everyone to Gaming with Everyone, and welcome you, Ron, to Gaming with Everyone. I hope you're excited to be here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really good, and I am excited to be here. Thanks for having me. This is really cool.
I'm so excited. So I love it. I love getting to have people on and get talking to critical thinkers and skeptics. Stuff super cool. So this is really awesome because this is stuff that I just love to do, and I love everything about it, and I'm the most excited. Okay, so I want to introduce you just a little bit more professionally with than just squeeing fangirl over you. Okay, with a little bit of this stuff. So this is your website here, guys. You can find this if you're watching. You can find this at raisingaskepticalkid.com. Awesome stuff where he posts links to all of his books and all kinds of other articles. Ron, you do a ton of awesome work here, and I think it's super, super cool. I love this palm reading, like pseudoscience experiment. That is super cool. And this Beyond Belief series is kind of is that like your most, and the Pixels, those are kind of your most well-known things that you put out?
Yeah, those are. The Beyond Belief book series is probably the most popular. That's the thing that most people know about.
Yeah, and I love these explaining psychology to a kid. These are a lot of fun too. Love these. April Fool's prank, hilarious. Definitely check him out here on raisingaskepticalkid.com, and then check him out on Pixels Books. These are awesome books for kids that help them deal with big feelings, and that is so important, right? I was a kid with big feelings, and I had trouble dealing with them, and I would have loved to have had a resource like this that I could have used. So this is just so cool. Ron just writes some of the coolest stuff, and I'd asked you before you came in one of the very few preliminary questions that I asked you, what is your one of your all-time favorite moments from one of your books? And you said it was going to be from the first Beyond Belief book. So tell me about it. What is your greatest hit moment from here that people should definitely go check out?
So the greatest hit moment is, and this is stolen from reality. This actually happened. The hero of the book, who's a kid, and basically debunks a faith healing preacher live on television using the same techniques that James the amazing Randy Banachek, and then a group of skeptics did to the faith healer Popoff. And if you don't know that story, just look up Randy versus Popoff and watch some videos about that. It's phenomenal. But there's a section of the book, a scene in the book, where the hero, a little kid, debunks a faith healer live on television, and it's so fun.
That's so cool. I love it, man. So I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to check that out. So that's awesome. I think that's a cool scene. I think that's a lot of fun. You should go check it out. Definitely check out Ron's books and get them. Read them to your kids. Teach them how to think critically and be skeptical. It's a lot of fun and very important. We're going to get into that later, Mr. Ron, about why that is. But I want to start next with kind of a little bit about us, just so we can find kind of our common ground, right? So I'm very much a person that in a lot of my youth, I picked up some of these sort of fundamentalist ideas, these kind of pseudoscientific ideas, and I dove headfirst into them. They made me feel really cool. They made me feel really smart. They made me feel really special. I was kind of, I could kind of argue these kind of contrarian positions. So coming from kind of this background of young earth creationism, it's always and then crawling my way out of it, right? It's always great to meet people who also have other experiences like this, so we can kind of compare. And in one of the only other preliminary things we did, you told me you have some experiences with cults and kind of fundamentalist religion and things in your family. So I'd love to ask you about that, and maybe we kind of you can hit me with some questions too. We could compare and contrast our experiences there. So what do you think, Ben? Tell me about it.
So I have an experience that is a little bit unique. It's different from yours in that I grew up not in a cult, but I didn't know growing up that I grew up with a single mom who basically had kind of escaped a cult.
Mm.
And her family, our extended family, was still in it while I was growing up. And I didn't really understand what was going on in our family. I knew something was up and I knew something was really strange. Their behavior, I just felt like something was off when I was growing up and I could not put my finger on it. And it wasn't until I was an adult, it wasn't until I was in my 30s that my mom finally told me, oh yeah, what I grew up believing some pretty wild things. And she was in a cult called the Worldwide Church of God. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've not.
It was run by this guy who was a former advertising executive who started a radio show, like a gospel radio show back in the 60s and 70s, I think. And he was sort of like Rush Limbaugh before Rush Limbaugh, right? So it was like this national show with apocalyptic religion mixed with conservative politics. And he basically started this cult that went national. There were branches everywhere, and it was super strict. You had to give a lot of money. You weren't allowed to celebrate birthdays or holidays. If you were in school, every time she was in school and someone had a birthday, when they started to celebrate, she had to leave the room, that kind of thing. Couldn't celebrate Halloween. A lot of those things were happening that were, for her, she always felt different and like othered from everyone. And then when she grew up, she kind of got away from that, raising me and my sister. And we were sheltered from that. We didn't really understand what was going on, but it wasn't until much later in life that I found out why our family was so different and why it always felt so strange. And now it makes a lot of sense.
That sounds very, I don't know if they are, but that sounds very Jehovah's Witness adjacent. The no holidays kind of thing. I don't know if like he specifically was Jehovah's Witness or not, but that's like almost exactly word for word what it's like to meet them. I used to work in thrifting retail. I won't say where because don't sue me, okay? But I used to work in thrifting retail, right? And when I was there, I used to help. I also, because I started going to school to do computer stuff, I got asked a lot to help like fix computers and set up networks in homes and things like this, little things. And I had a buddy from work who was whose family came from being Jehovah's Witness, and he was just like that, right? Like he was like, yeah, well, we buy our kid like presents every so often, and he just gets something every 3 or 4 months just so we can feel good. But we don't really celebrate holidays. We don't celebrate birthdays. We don't celebrate none of the stuff. And if you watch a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witness creators, which you may not, but for the audience, guys, if you ever watch guys like Darth Magog, Telltale, there's these creators online. Yeah, love Telltale. He's awesome, right? It was great. So if you watch guys like them, they'll tell you that a lot of that is, especially when he breaks it down in like the Caleb and Sophia debunks and stuff that he does, like it's very much to keep them othered and kind of separated from society, which is something we definitely want to get to.
Right, and this was like, from my understanding, is it was like the Jehovah's Witnesses, but even kind of more extreme, and all centered around this charismatic leader. So everything was about Armstrong, who was the leader of all this. And they would go to like these like yearly feasts, celebrations, where they gave a ton of money to him and stuff. It was pretty wild stuff.
Wow. That's what it comes down to, huh? Gotta make that money off people somehow. Gotta grift. Grifters gotta grift, I guess.
I mean, the former advertising executive turned radio show kind of shock jock starts a cult. Like it's the classic American success story.
Yep, sure is. Living the dream, buddy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah, my experience isn't much like that. My family was just Catholic. We were all raised Catholic, went to Catholic schools, stuff like that. And so we kind of had this, like just sort of default belief that like God's real, stuff like that. But my mom never really pushed that on me. Now my dad is the complete opposite. So my dad is like anti-religious, very spiritual. So he's very like, I don't like he didn't like Christianity like at all. His parents were like Baptist, right? So he just like he didn't like it at all. But he was super into like spiritualism stuff. So I and my mom was too. Because we have a lot of Native American kind of our family ancestry. A little bits here and there, and so that culture is really important to us. And so we used to tell stories about it, right? I used to grow up learning like Native American stories from like storybooks and mythology books and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. But it also gave me this crazy kind of eclectic upbringing of like, yeah, we believe in God, and we believe in Jesus, but also like energy healing is real, Reiki is real, astrology is real. You can talk to ghosts. You can do like African tribalism stuff is also real. Like voodoo is real magic, and so I'm a huge geek, right? But when you watch some of those anime series where it's like we call it kitchen sink anime, where they have like every major philosophy all at once, all in there. It's like we can do all these different kinds of magic, and there's angels, and there's demons, and there's shamanism, and it's like growing up in like a D&D world, right? Or like one of those kind of kitchen sink fantasies where like all of the beliefs are real and we'll just make them all conglomerate however we can.
I think that's one of the things that makes it so fun for a lot of people who believe these things, actually, is that it is like being in a D&D world. If you really sincerely believe these things, it feels like you're in some sort of magical game or movie.
Yeah.
And there is some research that shows that, if you believe one or two kind of superstitious things, the likelihood of piling on more increases with every one that you believe. So you can quickly exponentially grow your supernatural and superstitious beliefs very, very fast just by accepting one. You let one in the door, and they're like gremlins.
You feed one at the wrong time, and they're everywhere. Or what is it from Star Trek? Tribbles, right?
Tribbles. They're like tribbles.
Yeah. I love it. That's phenomenal.
First one's very cute and fuzzy. The first one's always cute and fuzzy, but they turn on you.
And I grew up like meeting like tons of people that were of like all different kinds of places. Like, in college, I met a guy who was Buddhist but practiced Lent. So he's a Chinese guy who was Buddhist, but he also practiced American traditions like Lent. And I was like, why would you do that if you're not Christian? I understand why I'm doing that because I believe in this stuff, but you don't. So like, why would you do that? And he was really interesting. He was just like, well, I think it's a good practice. It actually fits in really well with Zen and, all that sort of thing. And I was like, fascinating, right? And I met a guy growing up who was Wiccan. So I knew people who were like Wiccans and believed in witchcraft and stuff like that. And I think like just what you said where, once you kind of let a pseudoscientific belief like that or an unfalsifiable belief in the door, a supernatural belief maybe would be a better thing to say, you end up allowing for a lot more. And I think that's one of the things that made like young Earth creation so easy for me to accept, right? Well, there's all these forces in the world that we can't explain necessarily. Maybe we're just not necessarily correct on the age of the Earth. Maybe there's just a different explanation for all these things that we're not considering. And I treated, creationism as kind of like that, as it's an alternate explanation that's just not considered. And that's because, I didn't have any of the evidence for it, right? Like I went to a Christian private high school, and they had science classes and stuff, and they were academic standard classes. They did do that. But a lot of that gets glossed over. A lot of that gets kind of just, or, you hear it from one teacher who's like, yeah, I think so. I'm a theistic evolutionist. And you hear it from another teacher like, I don't think so. And I always give the example of my chemistry teacher. I took organic chemistry, and my chemistry professor was a PhD chemist, his doctorate of chemistry, but didn't think dinosaurs were real.
Yeah, it's shocking to me when I run into somebody who's managed to work their way all the way to the top of their field and get a degree like a master's degree or a PhD or something like that, and then they start adopting really, really fringe beliefs. It's shocking, but it happens a lot.
It's crazy. So you're a super educated person because you're a child psychologist, right? So yeah. I guess my next question, now that we kind of have a good base to work from, which is awesome. That's pretty crazy. I can't imagine like having a family that comes from a cult. That is, wow, like bona fide. That's crazy. So why child psychology then? And And what do you do as a child psychologist? Indoctrinate kids into liberal ideas, you know? Convince them they're cats. What do you do, Ron?
I mean, I think there are people out there that think that as soon as you start teaching kids about their emotions, you're indoctrinating them. So the reason why I got into child psychology, it's funny because when I started, what I wanted to do originally was research. I got into psychology. I got into my psychological program and I wanted to do research. And I started doing research, and it was a combined clinical program with you. So you do research, but you also have to learn how to do therapy. Mm-hmm. And what I discovered was that I loved the therapy. It was so rewarding to have a kid come in who is going through something tragic, or is just deeply misunderstood, and to be that person for them, to be that person that finally gets them or turns things around and makes the world a better place for them. Basically the job of a child psychologist is to give kids happy childhoods. It's the job in the world. So I love research and I love science, and you obviously can tell that if you read my work, but the therapy, that's where it's at.
That's phenomenal. I love it. And so you said your job is to give them happy childhoods, help them. You write books about helping them work through big emotions. And I know it's kind of a problem, right? Kids lack skills. And one of those skills they lack is regulating their own selves, how to deal with their own emotions. Sometimes they don't even have words for how they feel. So how does kind of therapy work for children? Why is this beneficial? Why take my kid to Dr. Ron, instead of telling him to tough up and or telling her to just be quieter, right? Why do that, man? Why?
Right. Well, there are a lot of reasons, but the big ones that I would point out is it's so much better to take your kids to a specialist, especially if they're having huge problems, like they're getting aggressive or their emotions are out of control or something like that. And you've tried everything as a parent and it's still not working. Mm-hmm. That's when you go see an expert. It's absolutely amazing to me that people will go get a personal trainer at the gym, or they'll go get a coach for their kid if they want them to learn basketball or whatever. But when kids are struggling with their emotions or they're having all kinds of problems with their behavior, they're sometimes pretty reluctant to go to an expert. But it is a huge help. And for most families, they describe it as life-changing. So the thing that's really important about it that parents really need to know is that when you take your kid to see a psychologist, a lot of the work is going to be done with the parents. And so my favorite therapy, the therapy that I love to do, I will do it every day of my life if I can do this therapy, is something called parent-child interaction therapy. And with parent-child interaction therapy, what we do is we teach parents play therapy skills. So the parents will learn how to be amazing play therapists. And then what I do is when they come in for their therapy sessions, I give the parent an earpiece, and then I go to another room and I watch them through closed circuit video, and then I coach them live on play therapy, and they become really good at it. And they become basically their child's, that they become that person that turns their kid's life around. They do it. And it's
cool.
Yeah, I love that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I do that most days, and it's really, really phenomenal.
That's awesome.
Feeling. Yeah.
I can attest to the usefulness of child therapy. I grew up, an undiagnosed autistic kid and needed a lot of it, right? So when I was a kid, there wasn't really good diagnoses for these sorts of things. So I got kind of, I don't want to say misdiagnosed, but the best they could do at the time. My child therapist told me I had anxiety disorder, trace obsessive compulsive disorder. So they identified some of my issues, and they tried to give me some labels and some treatments for them, which were really helpful. And then later on as an adult, I kept going back to therapy because I was struggling with major depressive disorder. I developed a horrible major depressive disorder. And so I was going back to therapy, and my therapist then, I was kind of talking to her, and introducing myself and my conditions and things and giving her the groundwork. And after a couple of sessions of talking to me, she was like, I don't think you have an anxiety disorder. I think you're autistic. That gives you a lot of social anxiety. Because you don't have anxiety like in all these other ways. You're just having this kind of trouble communicating, talking with people, things like that. And then we were able to kind of give me tools to work through that. If in my particular case, like everything is very behavior response to me. It's all very analytical, and I need it all mapped out and measured and things like that. And so we started talking about how to do things like scheduling stuff, which sounds really cringe, right? To be like, I need to schedule time with my family, but like if my family just comes at me out of nowhere and they're like, spend time with us, I'm like, whoa, this was on the schedule. I need this on the schedule. I need to know when I'm spending time with you and how long it's going to be and what we're going to do, and like, please structure this for me so I don't get frustrated, right? Like I needed skills like that are difficult to deal with. My partner is phenomenal for putting up with me, but learning skills like that, and then things like how to not be like so off-putting to people. It was how I learned to not be too deep. I was going around in the online dating circuit. I kept getting rejected for like being too deep or too into stuff. It's like, Lucas, nobody wants to hear about that. Okay, they want you to just be fun and friendly, talk about things you like to do, and go hang out and do stuff. Nobody needs your like dissertation on why StarCraft is the greatest game ever, because it perfectly encapsulates the ideologies of higher thinking and things like that. She's like, nobody cares about this. They just want you to be a fun person, right? Like if I ask you what your greatest fear is, tell me it's wasps, because that's what you're afraid of. Don't tell me this whole thing about like being afraid of being a failure. No one cares about that, okay? People that are close to you will care. Get them close to you first, and then you can express these deeper feelings, right? I was like, okay, I got that, right? So I learned like skills like that. I learned how to use stand-up comedy to learn to be kind of charming and learn off of others if that's what I'm good at doing. So that was super useful to me. And counseling has literally saved my life before. I've been depressed to the extent of planning on taking my own life, and going to therapy has kept me from that and saved me from not being here today. So I'm super pro therapy. I think what you do is phenomenal, and it's awesome.
I just want to thank you for sharing that so that people can hear that. That's cool you did that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think it's good to be honest about it, right? Like I don't mind admitting problems that I have if it shows, the way I see it is this, right? If one person in our audience watches this and they're on the fence about going to a therapist about an issue that they've had, and they hear me say that, and they hear me talking to you, and you're a safe and fun dude, and they think, I could go to therapy, right? Not 100% of every therapist is going to be an excellent therapist. Of course not. There are going to be bad experiences with therapy, but like in general, it's good. It's a safe and effective practice. In the same way that you go to the doctor when you're sick, in the same way that, like you said, you get a personal trainer at the gym, you take your car to a mechanic when it's broke, like you go to an expert. And when we're talking about the brain, go to a brain expert, right? You didn't go to school for like 12 years for nothing.
Yeah. And it's the most important thing you got, right?
Exactly.
You can't get away from it. Everywhere you go, you're in your brain. You have to make sure that you tune it up and fix it when it needs fixing.
That's right. So how did you go then from I love doing therapy with kids to I want to write children's books about therapy to kids? How did we do that?
So the therapy book, we'll talk about them separately because I had different motivations. So the therapy workbooks, the Pixel books.
Yes.
My motivation for that was I had been making my own therapy activities and worksheets for kids. And I've been doing this for years because a lot of what was available wasn't very good. A lot of it was like, some of it was really fun, but not really strongly rooted in the research on cognitive behavioral therapy. And then some of it was like really rooted in the research, but it actually wasn't very fun for the kids. It would be kind of dull. And a lot of the stuff that was available that was like good worksheets and activities were really more for older kids. So it'd be stuff for like teenagers and things like that. So it wasn't appropriate for younger kids. So I started making my own worksheets and things like that. And over the years, I kind of tuned them up and I got kids' feedback on them and that sort of stuff. And then at some point, I just had enough that I decided I wanted to do a book series. And that's when I put out the first book, which was Pixel's Big Book of Feelings. And it took off within the hospital where I work. Mm-hmm. A lot of people got a hold of it and started using it. And then, I'll hear from therapists, get emails from therapists and stuff around the world who are using it. And it's always fun to hear from folks that are using it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so then we had that series of books, and then we have our critical thinking books. And so you were like, hey, I'm successful with these books, these therapy books. Now, what about these critical thinking books? Why do you think it's important to write books for kids about critical thinking?
So I believe it's really important for kids to just learn about critical thinking and like healthy scientific skepticism. I think we're sort of in a crisis where we need kids learning this, and it needs to be a priority. So that's the primary motivation. But the reason why I wanted to do a book series was, well, it's like kind of a selfish reason. So I wrote the first one for my son. So I wrote book one. I wrote this book for him called Beyond Belief for his 10th birthday. And in the book, the character does a lot of the things that he and I had done together to like learn about critical thinking and fun stuff. And the character talks about a lot of the things that we had talked about and things like that. It was a way of kind of reinforcing and building that message. And I had wanted to get him a book about critical thinking with a fun character that was going on adventures, like Gravity Falls, Scooby-Doo, Goonies kind of book, something with like kids having adventures. With like paranormal adventures, but with critical thinking as the theme. And when I went and I looked, I couldn't find any really good ones. There wasn't stuff for his age. And so that's when I wrote him that book. And he loved it. It was a lot of fun to write, and then got it published. And then other kids started to respond. I started to get like emails from kids about the book, and even sending me like drawings and things of the characters and things they were imagining. And I got invited to talk to classrooms. So I would do like, Zoom calls with classrooms of kids that had been reading the book. And then I kept going and wrote the other books in the series. So it's been really cool to see kids' reaction to it. And they are really hungry for this kind of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that kids, kind of despite this reputation kids have for like hating school, kids love to learn. Even if they don't particularly like the school environment so much, even kids that don't care for that, they love learning new things. I think it's like super rewarding for them, right? Hits them right in the reward centers of the brain, makes them feel really good, makes them feel awesome to know stuff. And I think that being able to kind of put those skills in their minds early, like you said, really helps them kind of evaluate these claims. And that's kind of leading to, right? So do these critical thinking books tie into your work as a psychologist? Are they related in some way? Or are these kind of two separate skills that you're like, I want to kind of wear both hats? What do you think?
It really does tie into some of the stuff that I do as a psychologist, because the model that we use in psychology now, one of the primary models, the big one, is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the one that most psychologists are using these days. And a big component, a lot of people don't really understand that a very big component of cognitive behavioral therapy is understanding that the way you're thinking about things is making you distressed. And there's a fundamental assumption in cognitive behavioral therapy that the more distorted and out of line your beliefs are with reality, the more distress you're going to experience. So take anxiety, for instance. Anxiety is a good one. So a lot of what's going on with anxiety, there's a lot of physical stuff with anxiety, but a lot of it is self-talk, right? A lot of it is that inner monologue predicting what's going to happen next. What are people going to think about me? What's going to happen in the world? Like, how safe is it to go outside my house? A lot of that self-talk generates anxiety when it is predicting calamity, right? And a lot of those predictions are really what we call cognitive distortions. They're actually ways of thinking about things that are so biased that they lead you to feel anxious. So a lot of that therapy work is helping people to think more clearly and more rationally. And so critical thinking is actually embedded right into the therapy. Most of it with kids doesn't focus on that. But we do some of it with young children. And I'm a big fan of teaching kids these kinds of skills as early as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if I could try to sum that benefit up a little bit, it would be teaching you to think critically helps you manage the kind of your environment, the way you perceive your environment, which can alleviate distress, right? So being a good critical thinker alleviates distress on your mind, which can help you resolve things like anxiety, depression, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. The more clearly and rationally you think, the less likely you are to experience distress from your thinking.
There's I forget what the condition is called, but there's a what the technical name for it, but there's a condition by which like people tend to perceive themselves as kind of the main character of their own story, and everyone else is kind of like the side character, right? And they have this bias that like everything that happens revolves around them and their actions overmuch, right? Way more than it really does. And that can lead to a lot of like, everyone's judging me, everyone's going to think poorly of me, right? And one of the things that I had to learn is like, everyone cares about themselves, okay? Nobody is really paying attention to you unless it comes up, right? So if you just keep to yourself, you'll be okay. You know, if you're not out there bothering everybody, if you're not being a menace to society, people will leave you alone. You'll be all right. Like, no one cares. You'll be just fine. They have lives and their day to go on. You know, they're gonna do just fine. It alleviates a lot of that weight off the shoulders in a way.
We call that the spotlight effect. It's a cognitive bias that people have where they feel like the spotlight's on them, even when everyone's just going about their lives.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, and I think I think that having that, being able to think critically about like, is the spotlight really on me, helps alleviate that. And that's an example for you in the audience of how thinking critically can help alleviate your distress. The spotlight isn't on you all the time, and maybe on one hand that makes you feel less special, but on the other hand it also means you're not held to that big standard, right? You're going to be okay. Everything's fine. People have lives. They're going about their day. Don't worry about it. Do your best. When I used to run cross country, we used to say, run your own race, right? Don't try to win. Just finish the 3 miles without stopping and do that as fast as you can, but run your race. Don't run everybody else's race. So that's awesome. You talked about teaching kids as young as possible, right? Because you're into indoctrinating children. I know. So why?
Yeah, that's
that's right. Your job is to indoctrinate kids, okay? I understand. And so we got to get them young, right? But ironically, for this narrative being prominent in our society, right? There are a lot of spaces that say things like, I saw the village raising my kids, I don't want to have anything to do with it, or if you homeschool your kids, they won't fit in with society. There are things like, in very fundamentalist sects of any religion, there's an idea of like, you have to teach kids about their faith and get them set in their faith by a certain age, or it's going to take a lot more to get it to stick, or they're more likely to leave it. If you can get them young, the younger the better. There's a lot of like, things like, we want to get our kids in programs that affirm our beliefs and out of programs that challenge them as fast as we can, as much as possible, to the extent that a lot of parents will keep their kids home and homeschool them, and things like that. And it's kind of what I see online, the narrative, right? Because I go into these spaces, you have Facebook and stuff, is the narrative is kind of like, there's this antithesis between like generalized education, public education, right? Education for everyone, and private education, right? Homeschool education, raising kids in your own beliefs. And it's almost to the point where, on the other hand, they're making themselves antithetical to general education. So I want to know, like, in your opinion, because I feel that general education is really important, whether or not the techniques that you learn are particularly useful in your chosen career when you grow up, the skills you learn are valuable. And I think that it's really important to just teach those good thinking skills and make well-rounded adults that can go out and engage with the world. What do you think about that? Is this kind of this proposed dichotomy between general education and personal experience kind of education, right? Or kind of keeping everything within the group. Are these really so kind of diametrically opposed? Are they so antithetical? And is there a problem? Is the real indoctrination I'm going to keep my kid home and homeschool him so I can convince them the earth is flat kind of thing? What do you think?
I think that, so I run into families of all kinds in my work, and I have run into families that homeschool their kids and keep their kids home so that they can teach them that, the world is 6,000 years old, and, or I haven't met any that teach their kids that the world's flat, but I've met a lot of folks that are teaching their children that we live in the end times, that, that certain kinds of people are, like maybe working with the devil, like that kind of stuff. I've met some families that are teaching their kids some pretty unhealthy things, right? And I believe, this is my opinion, but I believe that if you are homeschooling your child in order to prevent them from learning about the kinds of things that they would learn in a general education environment, you're not educating your child, you're indoctrinating them. And that there's a big difference between getting an education, a proper education, and getting just a one-sided religious perspective from parents who have an agenda to make sure that their kid grows up to be a model churchgoer. If you are trying to do that to your child, you're doing a disservice. And, if your beliefs are true,
right,
you don't necessarily need to be pulling children out of school to learn them. They will withstand whatever scrutiny they encounter at school. And that's just the way things are. So, maybe if your beliefs are so out of alignment with what is being taught in science class that you can't have your kid go to science class, then maybe you need to reevaluate what you believe.
Yeah, I think so. And, and that goes beyond just science classes too, right? There are parents who disagree with things that are taught in the humanities, right? Yeah. And and things like that, like, and there's a lot of kind of strawman arguments about that too, where you get these really super far right groups that'll say, like, my kid is going to school to learn to hate himself because he's white, because he's learning critical race theory. It's like, I don't think you understand the definitions of any of the terms you just said. Right? Like, you have no idea, right? Please show me the Common Core standard as evidence that you're using to back that up, because all the codes are there. You can go look up the curriculum code and see what your kids get taught in school. It's not difficult to do. I found the math ones really easy to do my Dungeons and Math show, right? So, like, you can go find them. It's not hard, okay? I don't understand. And so it's like, it's super ironic to me, and it's very frustrating to me, because what ends up happening is, like, everything you get this like, how do they say it on Knowledge Fight? Everything we say they're doing is what we're doing, almost, right? So it's like, we're gonna alleviate all the blame from us, push that all off on somebody else. So it's really nice there's a corroboration on that, because in my experience as a private tutor, I see that all the time, right? I've met a flat earth kid, one so far. Hopefully I don't meet too many more. I would hope that whole ideology just dies away. But I have met one. And it I just kind of snuck it into what we were talking about. I was like, oh, really? That's interesting. And then, we were just talking about different stuff. And I was just like, here's a couple of things to think about, man. I don't need to change your mind, but here are some things, to think about. And I've met more than a few creationist kids, where we'll be talking about like, the one that was the most troubling to me was this young girl who was not only creationist. Who I brought up that because I tutor math, English, and sciences. I tutor all subjects K-12. I'm by no means an expert in all of those subjects. I don't want to say that. I don't want to paint myself in the wrong light. But I am generally knowledgeable enough in all of those topics to be able to teach them at a fundamental level. So I had a kid who I was mentioning that I tutor in sciences too, because I had been tutoring her in history and math. And it was really troubling. I mentioned something in historically that we've been doing for like 10,000 years, like agriculture, right? She's like, well, we don't really believe the earth is 10,000 years old in my family. I'm like, that's troubling. And so what I said to her was, oh yeah, I used to believe that too, in the past tense, right? Just sort of like, I was there. Yeah, I used to believe that, like you too. I know better now, but I used to believe that. And then we were having a discussion about not even just like science stuff, but about history stuff, and we were talking about the Civil War, and we were talking about the Civil War being fought over slavery, because it was, and we were talking about like the argument is always states' rights. States' right to do what? Have slavery. Duh, it's in their constitution. Go read it. Okay, it's a no-brainer argument. And she said something along the lines of, I don't remember exactly what it was, but something along the lines of, well, was it really so bad or so worth it to have this big giant war? Was it really that bad? Could slavery really been that bad? And I was like, yes, unequivocally, yes. And she I was like, this is a good critical thinking moment. So I just turned from stating into asking, and I said, well, kiddo, why do you think it's not that bad? And she was like, well, if you have a really nice master, then you're really just doing a job, right? You're learning skills, you're doing a job, you're getting hired out to do other jobs, and somebody's just taking care of everything for you. I was like, oh, okay, so let's think through this, okay? When you grow up, do you want to be able to pick what job you do? Yeah, okay. When you grow up, do you want to be able to pick the person you marry, the person that you fall in love with, you want to marry to? Yeah, okay. Do you want to be able to decide when you get to have kids and how many? Yeah, I guess. Okay, all right. Do you want to be able to raise those children in your own home? Well, yeah, of course. Okay. Do you want your kids to get to grow up to do whatever they want to do when they grow up? Well, yeah, of course. Okay. Do you like being told what you have to eat every day and where you have to sleep and when you have to sleep and when you have to get up in the morning? Well, I mean, but those are kind of, things I already do as a kid. No, okay. But think ahead to when you're an adult. When you're an adult, you might have a job that makes you have to get up at a certain time, sure. But if you really hate that job and don't want to do it, you can go get a different job, right? You might have food that you don't like to eat. You don't have to eat it. You can buy whatever food you want. Do you enjoy all of these privileges in life? She was like, yeah. And I was like, good. Slaves have none of those. Right? So you tell me, how nice of a master would I have to be to convince you to go to bed when I want, wake up when I want, eat what I want, sleep when I want, work the job I want you to do, hire you out to who I want to do, not pay you for any of it. You have to live in the house I say you have to live in, under the conditions I say you have to live under. And if you misbehave, I get to physically harm you. I get to tell you who you're going to marry. I get to tell you when you're going to have kids and how many. And then I own your kids. And I get to tell them what to do for the rest of their lives. They're born into bondage. Do you think that's okay to be born into a situation where you had no choice but to be where you are? And she was like, oh, no. I was like, there we go. Okay. And it's great how, on the one hand, that's terrifying. On the other hand, awesome how we can go through a series of questions to get to the conclusion at the end. And I think that's really kind of the crux of like critical thinking and what education does in a way that's not always evident. When you ask your kid, what'd you do at school today? Nothing. You don't realize that they're spending the whole day being asked those questions.
Yeah.
So they can come to those conclusions. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. If your beliefs could stand up to the scrutiny, then you would welcome the scrutiny. Right? If creationism was true, you'd go back into court. You'd have another Scopes monkey trial. You'd try to get it put in schools again. It's not my fault. You got shot down every time. Sucks to be you, creationists. Okay, I don't know what to tell you.
This whole conversation reminds me of this recent thing that happened in Florida where they were trying to put that slavery was a skill building activity or something into the curriculum with kids were learning. And it's not just that, kids are, vulnerable to getting sort of misinformed by parents, but there really is like an active movement out there of people trying to teach kids like basically misinformation or to spin true information in such a way that they reach conclusions that are essentially the same you would reach with misinformation. And it's really scary. And that's one of the reasons why we need critical thinking, so that, people can learn to question these things when they start to happen, especially when powerful people are trying to get you to believe things that are in their interest and not yours.
Yeah. And that's a really good case of that, right? Where that curriculum takes examples. And if you just read like the curriculum code, it's not that, it doesn't sound that bad, kind of like, it's just very poorly worded, I think. And it really depends on how it's implemented. And the problem with the code is that it's too open-ended, I think, that specific code that they're talking about. Because there are examples in history of slaves being hired out to do jobs and learning trades and keeping some of their money and then buying their own freedom and then leaving slavery with with a skill and going on to do. Like, okay, but that's the exception. That's not the rule. That is an exceptional person who did that. You can't teach that like that just happened all the time, like it wasn't so bad because the slaves that actually worked hard could work their way out of freedom, right? It's like when people try to defend biblical slavery by saying, well, it's debt servitude or whatever, right? Like, it's still slavery, dog. like I don't know. I don't understand. Like the amount of copium you have to take to try to defend like Old Testament slavery is insane, right? Like I don't understand. The cognitive dissonance is baffling to me.
Yeah, and it really is. And that's one of those subjects where if you really want to see someone really wrestle with something and try to use motivated reasoning to make something that it's not, that's the topic, because biblical slavery is one of those things where, you know, people just cannot reconcile that with all the other beliefs that they have about their religion. And it really makes it clear to them that there is something, at least one thing about their religion or about their holy book that is clearly wrong.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's a pretty brutal one. And I've seen some, because I watch a lot of online debates and stuff, and there's a really good debate between Mark Reed and JIL, Jesus is Lord, about it. And watching Jill try so hard to hold up that position that there isn't slavery is, it's phenomenal. If you know, for the audience, if you don't know Mark Reed, you should check out his channel because he's a phenomenal debater. And that debate he does against Jill on Debate Cafe was phenomenal. He absolutely stomped Jill into the ground, and it was tremendous. But yeah, so we were talking about teaching kids critical thinking, and there's a resource I have that showed you. It is called the Critical Thinking Project. I'll put it on the screen for the audience here. And I saw you check it out because I saw you post about it on Facebook. And they have these 3 really cool like apps, right? It's made by David Husness, Dr. Husness, who I saw I actually found him on TikTok. Because he's Pet Earthling on TikTok, and I listened to some of his videos, and I was like, oh, I want to go check him out. And then I found this that he does, and I teach this to students. I teach them the Think Keen and the Foolices.
Yeah.
We usually don't have enough time in the year to get through all 3. So if I have to leave one out, I leave out the fact debate. But the Think Keen, I think, is just an awesome series of lectures that he's up to 7 now because he added 6 and 7. When he first started, he only had the 5, and now he has 6 and 7, and they're really good. And what I like to do with students is I like to run through those lectures and then those slides, give them the questions, kind of see how they do, and then, you know, talk about different things. And it's a really great conversation starter for them, I think, because in a lot of ways it presents the ideas of good critical thinking first, and then we'll give an example of a pseudoscience that doesn't do that. So in the first lecture, for example, we talk about the importance of controlled studies, trials, and why in like medicine those matter so much. And then he kind of sneaks in like, so then now when you go to the store and you see not approved for the cure or prevention of any disease or illness, you understand that hasn't been put in a controlled trial, and that's why the FDA makes them say that. And so that's labeled a supplement. It's not medicine because it didn't go through that controlled trial. And people who like it with anecdotal evidence. But is that anecdotal evidence really important? And he gives the hypothetical example, the face cream, the zit cream. And I think those are really good. My other favorite way to trick kids is to get him with the chemophobia lecture. And what we'll do is he presents the dihydrogen monoxide example, right? And then I go find dhmo.org. I'm like, okay, so let's laterally search this. Let's see if we can find anyone who agrees with this, right? And by this point, I've given them like 3 lectures already that have been really factual. They don't know I'm ready to lie to them, and so I do, right? Except it doesn't lie at all, which is phenomenal, right? So we go to dhmo.org and we just read down the FAQ, like I just read, like all the dangers, right? And it's all kinds of things, you know. Oh, it's the primary component in acid rain. It's the it's the every vicious dog attack has DHMO relation, right? Everyone who's ever been a serial murderer takes DHMO. Everyone who cheats at sports takes DHMO and stuff like that. It's like, I was like, you know, it's not only, and then I always give them stuff like, not only is it in, I try really hard to make this as overblown as possible, and they always believe me. I don't know how. And then I go, you know, not only is it in bleach and your household cleaning products, but it's in your Kool-Aid, and it's in your soda pop, and it's in your juice. Can you believe we give that to our kids? And I get these like teenagers, right? These like 16-year-olds, you know, that are like, oh my God, really? Yeah. I love it. So I hit him with that, and then I go back to thinking. I go to the next slide. By the way, everything I just said is bananas because this is just water, and I just convinced you to ban water without lying to you, and that's how easy this is. That's how easy it is to not lie. and get you to do that. So those are a couple of my favorite examples from those. What do you think about David Hunsta's thing? Do you think that might be a good resource that's free?
It's a great resource. I discovered it because you shared it with me, and I've been going through it a little bit, and I've been sharing it on my like social media and stuff because I think it's a really cool resource. And yeah, I just want to learn more about it because I am doing something similar right now. I'm working on a parenting book to how to teach kids critical thinking. And I love his approach and I love what he's doing. He's got a really cool way of doing it. I love the apps. I think it's just it's fun and it's just like it's really cool. I highly.
I love the way I also particularly like the way he shrinks down logical fallacies from this like giant unmanageable list into these kind of fallacies that are kind of prominent ways people fool. So I like those too. So if you're a parent and you're watching this and you're like, hey, I want to teach my kids to think critically, you go check out Dr. Dad's books, Beyond Belief. Read them with your kids. Go check out other exercises he had on his website. If you're thinking, hey, my kid's got big feelings and I'd like some ways to deal with them, go check out Ronald Crouch's books on Pixel's Big Book of Feelings. Right? Check those out. Those are awesome. And if you want a free resource, if you don't have the money right now and you want a free resource, hey, psychologist recommended, right? Dr. Hudson says thecriticalthinkingproj.org. And of course, we recommend Melanie's thinkingispower.com for the older ones out there. But that's not always so kid appropriate, which is why I didn't show up in this one.
Yeah, it's appropriate for the parents. And
it is great for them.
If a parent goes through that site and starts to learn some of those techniques, especially the floater technique, if they go through that and they start learning those things, then they can translate that for their kid and they can start to apply some of those things in a way that their kid can pick up on.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So we talked about we kind of alluding to these like critical thinking skills that are kid appropriate. So like, kids' brains aren't developed all the way yet. We can't expect them to think like adults necessarily, right? Because maybe they're missing some facilities or maybe they just have things they don't know or, that sort of thing. So like, how do I introduce a kid to critical thinking? What are age appropriate critical thinking skills for kids, depending on groups like early childhood, middle school, high school? What do you think?
So when I started out researching this and trying to understand it, I came at it from the assumption that basically we would have to wait until about the age of like 9 or maybe 11 before we started teaching critical thinking skills to kids. But then I took a deep dive into the literature and I realized I was really wrong. Very young kids can learn critical thinking skills. And in fact, it's probably more accurate to say that very young kids are critical thinkers, but we are just not picking up on it. And what we need to do as parents and as educators is understand when we're seeing critical thinking happening with kids and how to develop that and identify it, develop it, reinforce it, strengthen it. That's really what we should be doing as adults. And the fact is that a lot of us have sort of been, I think, trained to look at kids as, little kids who, people who can't think critically yet. They just can't do it. But the thing is, they can. They're doing it alongside of all of this magical thinking at the same time. And so we focus on the magical thinking and we're like, oh yeah, of course, they believe in interstellar zombies from the planet Taco One. Why would they be able to think critically, right? But they can think critically. And in fact, a lot of the creative stuff that they're doing, critical thinking skills are embedded in those, but we just we don't see it. So what I would recommend, I have this acronym that I use when I'm teaching parents about this, and the acronym is SMART. So what you need to look for when you're in your kids is you need to look for skepticism. You need to look for skepticism, making terms clear, asking for reasons and evidence, reviewing evidence for quality. So asking how you know what you know and wanting to see sources and things like that. And then picking up on testing things and tools of reason, right? Kids actually do all of those things. They do all of those pieces of the SMART acronym. But as adults, we don't necessarily see it happening. What we see is the big messy room and the lost shoe and all the stuff that's going on. As parents, we see the magical play and we're like, wow, the kid's in his own world. It's amazing. But we don't see those little flickers, those embers, sparks of critical thinking that are already happening. Mm-hmm. Once we identify them and we're able to spot them as they're occurring, then we can start to use our authority as parents and to jump in there and to identify that, to help that child learn that there's a name for that. It's wonderful. I'm so happy you're doing this. And here's what we can do together to make it even stronger.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I had so you alluded to this, like kids do think really critically, right? Even at very young ages. And so I read one time, I don't remember exactly where, and I'm not going to go look it up. I've read before that even at very, very early ages, though, you can correct me, that even if you have like a toddler sit in the high chair, right, and they're eating and they spill the food, and then you go pick it up for them, they're gonna spill it again. And then see if you're going to pick it up for them. And then if you do, they're going to spill it again. Hey, can I keep getting dad to do this? And they're learning behaviors. They're learning response behaviors. Oh, when I spill the food, dad will pick it up. And I'm learning to test this. So I'm going to test you over and over and over again. See if you'll do this every time. And if you do, then I learned, if I spill the food, dad will pick it up. I don't have to. Dad will get it for me every time. And that's where like managing expectations with your kids, is important. Like, hey, I might help you the first time, but after the first time, after the second time, now it's going to be on you, right? I don't mind helping out. We ought to help each other, but if you're going to take advantage of it, no problem, right?
Yeah, that testing, that T in the SMART skills, that testing, it starts really early.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as kids can start to manipulate their environment, they're dropping things to see, is gravity still working? Like, what's happening here? They're constantly testing things. If you give a child anything, you give them a pair of keys, they'll look at it, they'll start to shake it. It makes a noise. They're testing everything in their environment. They test people, they test objects, they test their ideas. They're always looking for things to try out and test. And that's a deep, deep component of critical thinking. So if we can identify that for what it is and then reinforce it, we're helping them become better critical thinkers.
Phenomenal. And so to kind of wrap up our discussion on kids here, right? What do we talk a lot about this. A lot of what you do is teaching these skills to kids. It not only helps them regulate their emotions and identify them and understand them, it helps them engage with the world around them and learn it and discover it. The other reason, and then we talked about kind of the other side of that, right? We kind of have on the one side, we've been talking about like the system 2 thinking, right? These executive functions, critical thinking sort of things. And on the other hand, there's, you have that system 1 thinking, people that are into like the narratives and they're super into their beliefs and they really don't want them to be challenged. And they have a lot of these tribalistic or political or religious narratives that they're really into, and they don't want those challenged by general understanding. They think that we're going to indoctrinate their kids or whatever, right? So we kind of talked about these, and I think that teaching these critical thinking skills to kids helps break that up, because we can just look at everything objectively. We can say, okay, well, here's what we know, and here's how we know it, and we know we came to that through good reasoning and understanding, and so there doesn't have to be an us versus them. There just are facts, and that way we don't need this indoctrinated thinking before, because it really goes nowhere. Because I believe wholeheartedly that, like, on the one hand, your critical thinkers that are like, well, you just believe everything that you're told, and then you have these system 1 people who are like, well, you just believe everything that you're told because the authorities said it or whatever. It's like, no. I don't just believe textbooks because textbooks say that. I believe textbooks because I understand that they are collectives of scientific consensus data and information, right? Like, lots of people did lots of work, and you can go find that. And so I think that not only do these critical thinking skills help children with their world around them, I think that it helps them manage themselves and their own emotions. But like we've talked about, it helps. I talked about this a little bit before with Melanie, but it helps inoculate them. It's this kind of inoculation theory of inoculating them against misinformation. If you teach them how to think critically now, you inoculate them against beliefs that might try to take them over later, like what I did when I got into high school, or in middle school, late middle school, and early high school, and thought, hey, maybe all this evolution stuff isn't really there, or maybe it's just misinformed, or maybe all this geology stuff and this radiometric dating doesn't really work. So I could hang on to this idea that, everything is made just for me. And how nice is that? Do you think that that's a fair assessment of another use of critical thinking skills? What do you think?
It is the assessment. So here's the thing. So the whole purpose, so the parent book that I'm writing right now to help parents teach their kids critical thinking, the whole premise of this book is the idea of inoculation. So we will identify those critical thinking skills as they're coming up, and then reinforce them and strengthen them and teach them to your children. But to really teach them to your kids, you have to engage in inoculation. There's another term that people really like, and the kids really like this term, which is pre-bunking. So the idea that what you want to do is you want to find like a belief that is, it's like a supernatural belief or a paranormal belief or something like that. But essentially, it's not like supercharged. There's nothing political about it. It's not like someone's religion or something like that. But you find something that's relatively harmless but paranormal, and then you work on it together using your critical thinking skills. So you investigate it together, and you can do this through what I call critical thinking field trips. So you can actually go to places where you can do an investigation, Scooby-Doo style. That's so fun. But you can also do activities at home. Like you can do dowsing at home. You can do therapeutic touch, like Emily Rose's experiment. You can do that at home. You can do a lot at home where you're actually pre-bunking supernatural beliefs. And the cool thing about it is, not only do the kids learn the critical thinking skills when you do this, they have a ton of fun doing it. They learn to associate critical thinking with like the adventure of learning. Like it's so cool. And then by the time they run into something later in life where they're on their own and they encounter this very like kind of tempting belief that seems really out there, but they kind of want it to be true, they'll have all those skills and all that experience to draw on, and they'll know what steps to take.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So it's just tremendously useful all the way around. And this really, leads back into like, we talked about why is general education important for kids? Why ought kids be made to go to public education? Because there are people online who debate against that. They think the kids shouldn't have to do that. If parents just want to keep them home and not teach anything, that's the parent's prerogative. The kid can grow up to learn things as they do. And I think that there are two big barriers to that, two reasons why that's not okay. The first is the massive amount of things that you learn when you're in school across the span of 17 years almost, or 17 years of like, what do we do? 12 years of graded school, right? And plus preschool. So we're talking about the massive amount of learning that you do in that 12 to 13 years before you get into college is very difficult to replicate as an adult. Because I tutor adults in things like the GED, and the amount of time it takes an adult to study for the GED if they have no education. So I had a student just recently this last year who didn't get his diploma. He dropped out like super early in his academic career. He didn't even know how to do like basic algebra. Like he'd never done math with letters in it before. The amount of time we spent reviewing arithmetic to just get to the algebra he needs to know for his test was so long, seeing him twice a week even, that he couldn't afford it. He went down to once a week, and then eventually he was just like, I can't do it. So I gave him Khan Academy, right? Free resource, phenomenal stuff. And I was like, just take every math course that's on here except the ones that say calculus, right? And this linear algebra college down here, you don't need that. But like, just take all of the grade level maths, because you're just going to have to go back and do it all over again. And it's an astronomical amount of work, and people don't understand how much that is. So even if you don't go into your chosen field, there are a ton of those skills that if you waited your whole life to develop them would be very difficult to develop. Right? They're going to be incredibly time consuming, and it's going to put you off. Where if we can just kind of generally prepare you for everything, it onboards you onto whatever topic you want to go to faster. It makes you a more well-rounded adult, able to engage with more things. You ought to know history, and you ought to know how economics works, and you ought to know how, you ought to take at least Psych 1 in high school, right? Learn the basics of how the brain works. Learn the basics of how the body and cells work. Learn the basics of evolution. It doesn't have to be all the stuff, just like, common descent. Fine. Right, whatever. There are a lot of basic skills like these that these people grow up to vote. Okay, I want people who vote to be educated people, right? Like, I don't care if it's not your job, dog. You got to vote for who's going to lead this country. And some people who come up and try to lead the country I live in are like, vaccines don't matter. Masks are BS. I'm sorry, I don't want that person to even have a fighting chance.
Yeah, that person's vote counts just as much as yours. So it's wild. But I think in education, so when I did my PhD on something called belonging, right? So like the psychological construct of belonging and how important that was for children's well-being and health. And I studied it in schools. And one of the things that came across in the research when we're doing the literature review was they talked a lot in the education research about the importance of what's called the implicit curriculum of school. And the implicit curriculum is everything that you learn about the world and about yourself and about friendship and about community and about all of the stuff that is entailed in being in a school with others that you can't get through just, the regular curriculum. That implicit curriculum is one of the primary reasons why we are so adamant about including people with disabilities into regular general ed classrooms. Because it's very important that they learn those things too. Everybody deserves to learn those things. But when a parent is pulling their kid out of school and not allowing them to go because they may have some difference with the philosophy of the school or what they're learning at the school, they're actually robbing them of that piece of it, that implicit curriculum, which is vital for kids' development, especially once they leave school, once they're launching into adulthood. All of the things that they're going to need to know about how to get along with others and being in a workplace, or how to handle gossip and all that kind of stuff. That's all learned as you're growing up in a school environment. Yeah. It's really important.
And I want to give a qualifier because we have been kind of beating down on homeschool pretty hard, right? So I want to give a qualifier that I understand not a homeschool is bad, okay? I understand lots of kids homeschool for very important reasons that are unique to their family. I get it, okay? I did homeschool for the last year of my high school too, right? Because my mom got sick and I needed to stay home and take care of her. So I did it for that reason. We still tried to put me in schools, right? We went. And I went to different schools. I went to Montessori school for grade school because I didn't do well in a public school classroom, okay? I am one of those students who doesn't do well or who did not do well in that public school environment. I get it. However, I want to be really clear that the specific point that we're discussing is not I chose to homeschool my kid for an economic reason or a financial reason or want to keep them out of a school in a town that's dangerous, right? Maybe lots of kids bring guns to your school and you don't want them to go. Okay. One of the reasons I went to the religious school instead of my local high school is because my local high school has a lot of crime and my mom didn't want me to go there. Right. So fair. Okay. I get that. I wish I had more critical thinking skills going into that school, but fair enough, right? And same thing, right? For me and my whole family, right? We both, my sister and I both went there because it was a private school. It was a college prep school too, which was nice. The actual curriculum to education I got was really good. So I know I disparaged them for a lot of other things, but the actual curriculum to education was fine. Right, I was taking college level English by the time I was a junior in high school, so it was good. That being right, so I totally understand that. So there are parents who want to keep their kids out of school because it's dangerous. I get it. There's parents who want to keep their kids out of school because they're military families. They move all over the country. I get it. Okay, I understand that there are legitimate reasons to homeschool kids. I'm not saying that there's not. What we're talking about here, before you come at me in my comments, people, okay, what we're talking about is parents who specifically keep their kids home because they want to indoctrinate them with a philosophy or an ideology, or they want to make sure they don't learn a specific philosophy or ideology. Maybe they're I don't like having to say all of the phobics all at once, so I'm just going to say queer phobic, right? But maybe they're LGBTQ phobic and they want their kids to grow up to be queer phobic. So they just hate queer people. They want their kids to grow up with queer people. They think that when their kids go to school, they're going to teach them how to be queer, which no one does, right? Like kids discover that they're queer. No one has to teach them that. Okay.
That
right.
Would kill.
Which one? What was it?
The idea that you could somehow teach somebody to be queer. Like it's like, have you ever met a human being before? Like, how does that work?
Right. Yeah, it was a fundamental part of my deconstruction, right? Was finding out that like my best friend of all time was queer, and I was like, really? That's okay. We're gonna rethink some things. But you can't kids discover that they're queer. They're not taught that. You can't be taught that. It's a fundamental part of your identity. And so maybe they're like, well, I don't want my kid exposed to any of that. I don't want my kid exposed to people of other religions. Lots of parents want to keep their kid from going to like colleges over. They feel like they're going to learn about other religions and maybe they'll go off. There are all kinds of philosophies like that. So what we're specifically talking about here, and I want to be really clear about this, is that for those reasons of being philosophically opposed to things that are generally accepted in the rest of society, being tolerant of faiths, being tolerant of identities, being tolerant of, I don't know, women wanting to get jobs when they grow up, like whatever their ideology is.
Insert the word woke.
Yeah.
They want to keep their kids from being exposed to anything that they would label as woke.
Woke is it's so dumb to me too, because woke is such a nebulous, meaningless term, and it literally just stands in for everything I don't like.
Yeah, whatever you want, that's woke. Yeah, woke. Whatever you don't like, whatever you're against, whatever, it's all woke.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly what I'm thinking too, as I'm talking about homeschoolers. That's what I'm thinking about as well, just to be clear, that I am thinking about these people who pull their children out of school for ideological reasons so that they can keep them from learning about things that they disapprove of and indoctrinate them with their ideology. Like that's a huge problem. And it is one that I do run into this periodically with families, and these children are not prepared for the world.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we can kind of wrap up our discussion on talking about indoctrinating kids into our woke ideology. Now, let's talk about how we got indoctrinated to woke ideology. No, I'm just playing. So what was the moment, Dr. Dad, that you decided you were a skeptic? Because I didn't have like a single moment for mine. Mine was kind of an ongoing process of deconstruction. But what did you have a moment? Some people do, where they were like, I think I'm a skeptic today. What do you think?
Yeah. I did. I had a moment. It was pretty dramatic too. So it was, so what happened? So I was what you might call growing up and in young adulthood, maybe a soft skeptic. Like was pretty much skeptical about stuff, and I believe science, but I didn't really think about it much. It was never something that was on my mind. I certainly never pictured myself ever being like an advocate for critical thinking, teaching kids skepticism and critical thinking. Like the whole idea was just totally foreign to me. But what happened was someone that I was very close to and loved very much came to me as a high schooler and said, you know what? I think I want to be a youth pastor. And at that time I was like, I wasn't into religion or anything like that. And I didn't have very strong feelings about it. And I was a skeptic, but I just had images of a youth pastor being someone who coaches Little League baseball and does after school activities with kids. Like, I was like, oh, this is awesome, dude. Yes. And so he went off to a Bible college where he could get that kind of training. And he came back, and my first interaction with him was one of the most alarming moments of my life.
Oh no.
It was, he said, I need to tell you that we're living in the end times, and the devil's at work in the world, demons possess people. It was basically everything that you would think of as the most far out there stuff in that world of religion was just coming right out. And this is a person who, I still love him dearly. He's very, very close to me. He's the sweetest person, like so kind, so sweet. And the fact that this kind of derangement happened that fast really woke me up to this. And it made me think, wow, somebody with the kind of heart and the kind of values that this guy had could get indoctrinated into something so toxic and so out there and so wildly supernatural so quickly really got me. It really like was very jarring. And at that point, I just started reading more about the school he went to, and then that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of reading more about like, you know, the importance of speaking out against these kinds of things, and to really becoming more of an advocate for reason and rationality and critical thinking and skepticism, and how that was really important. And it was in that moment with him, that's really when it happened, when I realized, okay, yeah, I can't not say something about this. This is
Right.
a huge.
Yeah, it has to be. That's very alarming. Like to have a person who is sane just go to a school and come back like a year later and be, wow. I wonder. Oh, I'm sorry.
Half a year. It wasn't even a full.
Oh my God. One semester. I'm super curious, and you may or may not know this. I'm super curious if that person had any of those kinds of beliefs already kind of waiting and they just got justified, or if they developed them whole cloth when they went. That would be a.
He did have some, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of having the gremlins come in, right? So he had some, he did have, so he was already religious. He had been going to this church in his town, and the church was, I really didn't think much of it. I thought the church was just a normal, regular church. And the college that he went to was associated with this church. And I didn't know what he was learning there, but never in our conversations and never in the course of our years together did I ever encounter him saying anything. So, I mean, he said really hateful stuff about gay people, stuff like that. I'd never heard anything like this from him before. But I'm sure he already believed in a lot of the supernatural stuff that's part of the religion. I just never thought that would be the doorway in to some of these other more extreme beliefs, but it is for some people.
Yeah, that's super unfortunate. Like that's pretty crazy, and that's kind of a good counterpoint. Not to double back too terribly much. It's kind of a good counterpoint to like, you know, you have these like the super conservative narrative that like schools indoctrinate your kids, and especially for like people like Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll say like don't send your kids to college because you know they won't be Jehovah's Witnesses when they come back. They'll turn them from the faith, like that sort of thing, right? Don't go get educated. And it's like, on the one hand, I have to have two qualms with this, right? Kind of like we talked.
It's not wrong.
It's not. First of all, it's not wrong. Yes. Yeah.
Not wrong.
First of all, it's not wrong, as it ought to be. Okay. I tell you what, man, I'm all about like people expressing their religion. Okay, it's totally fine. Like and accepting people just the way they are. Oh my God, if Jehovah's Witnesses disappeared tomorrow, I would not shed a tear. Right? Like, oh my God. Wow, I just can't. Yeah, I can't. Anyway, so like you have, you know, on the one hand you have this, on the other hand you have like actual schools like that will like that a person will walk in and walk out a completely different person. It's crazy. And I even have a student that I understand this anecdotal evidence. Okay, I'm giving my anecdote here, but like to give an anecdotal example, I have a student that I've tutored who is queer, who goes to a Catholic school where she has to hear every day how awful it is that she's queer, how much she has to hide that from everyone, right, except for her very close friends, and specifically like has conversations in class about how like abortion is murder. You know, it's like you want to talk about pushing a political ideology. Like you may think it is or not, it's fine, but that's a moral discussion. It's not an objective discussion. There's no place in school. Right? Yeah. Like that's not at all, because it's an inherently subjective claim. Yeah. To hear her say like, yeah, you know, we went to school and I was the only kid in my class who argued for like a woman's right to choose out of every other girl in my classroom. And I was like, that is sad. And kind of ridiculous that they would just push that narrative like where that legitimately happens. So that's batting. Yeah, I totally think that's the case. Wow, that's a crazy experience, dog. That's not so.
Yeah, it was, and it was yeah, like I said, it was one of the most alarming 3 minutes of my life, and it was something I had to process for a long time before I finally figured out like, okay, yeah, this stuff is real. This stuff is really truly a threat. It does actually. These kinds of things happen to good people, yeah. And they happen. I believe that the antidote to this kind of thing is teaching children young critical thinking and skepticism, so they're ready when they encounter these kinds of ideas.
That's crazy. So you had this really alarming experience. You decided to be a public advocate for critical thinking, right? What made you decide to do that? And what is that like to be that person?
Yeah. So at first I didn't do anything publicly and for a very long time. And I was just quietly kind of absorbing what was out there. So I was kind of, following people on social media and stuff who were talking about these things. I was reading a lot of books about it. And I think when I decided I needed to be more public and more vocal was this is definitely going to like upset some people, but this is my lived experience.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It was during the 2016 election. When I'd never seen misinformation, conspiracy theory style thinking, and I'd never seen anything like that where those kinds of problems became like literally changed the course of history. And I felt like we were sort of in a moment where it's all hands on deck. Everybody has to get on board with like, we need to all be doing something about this, because clearly about a third of our population, a quarter to a third, are really out of touch with reality. And we need people to say things about, to start talking about this and to start promoting and advocating for, rational, reasonable thinking. Critical thinking is a civic value. And I believe it's a family value. And we need more people out there just saying this and being very clear about it, because for some reason, the message has never really gotten through to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's bananas.
Yeah. And then as far as like what it's been really interesting, because like I get it's hot and cold. It's hot and cold. Like I get people who absolutely love it. Like who contact me and like want to talk and just are just so excited about this. And, they want more, they want to hear more about it. They want to know more about it. They want to spread the message too. Mm. And then I get people who absolutely are furious with me about it. I get so many people especially on social media. Social media is like, people get on there and they will just argue. I get flat earthers, I get young earth creationists, I get anti-vaxxers, so many anti-vaxxers. Wow. I get so many conspiracy theorists of so many stripes. And, most of them are like poly conspiracy theorists.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course. Right. Because they all beget each other. Right.
They believe conspiracy theories that contradict each other.
Yep.
They believe them all, and so I get them on my social media. And if you look at like a post of mine, if I post something on social media, what the funny thing is that, it'll have something like, hundreds of people liking it. But then you look at the comments and the comments are all people like trashing me. And it tells you like there's like a core group of folks who just really love this stuff and appreciate it. And then there's another core group of folks who just want to argue and they believe it and they kind of hate it. And it's for me, luckily, I feel lucky that I got all this training as a psychologist, because I know not to pay attention to it. Like I know how to guard my mental health, so I just kind of step away and I don't engage a lot of the time. And I pretty much ghost those people because it's often not worth it. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. And I just know how to like manage it pretty well. So I think I'm lucky in that regard.
Yeah. When I talk to, I like referencing other conversations because I like collective knowledge. Collective knowledge is important, right? So when I talked to Melanie about this, we talked about how our audience is not the person we're talking to, it's normies, right? It's other people that are going to see those conversations posts. And I do that a lot because I go find them, right? When I started on Facebook and I started as Gaming with Everyone on Facebook, I went and found these. I was like, I want to go talk to flat earthers, right? I want to go, because if I'm going to talk about this stuff online, I want to cut my teeth on these arguments, right?
Yeah. My hat's off to you.
It's hard, okay? But so much fun. It's so much. My mathematical model to this day is unrefuted. My trigonometry model is. I've not met a flat earther that I posted that in that group that has made an adequate refutation of it yet. It's phenomenal. To show that for the sun to set on flat Earth, it has to be an impossible distance away. or an impossible distance high. It's a ton of fun. My second model I'm the most proud of because I used like actual measurements of the world and day and time, like times. And if you solve a right triangle for where the sun has to be from LA to Tokyo, it makes a right triangle. And if you solve that right triangle, assuming the Earth is flat, then the sun can only be about 2 miles up. Can't happen. Sorry, it sucks to be you. Because for the sun to set on flat Earth due to perspective, it has to reach an angular resolution of less than 0.02 degrees. That's how perspective works, right? That's the ocular resolution of the eye. So if I were laying on the ground so that my vision is tangent to the surface but sees up to the sun, it has to be 2 miles up in order for it to resolve that small. You can solve the triangle. And this is something you can do in your own home. You talked about experiments you can do in your own home to test things like this. You can do this in your own home, put a camera on the floor, put a light up on the wall, and get a protractor, measure the angle, and then measure the distance along the floor, and you can measure the distance up and to the light. Works just fine.
That'd be pretty cool. That would be pretty
super fun one. I got it from, I can't take credit for it. I got it from MC Tunes on his website, mctune.net. And he has a whole breakdown of it and how it works. Way better than I do on my little whiteboard sketch, but I liked to have my own example. He used like the solstices, which was really cool. And he got basically about the same numbers that I did, which is awesome because we both did it and corroborated the same numbers. So it's really cool. But so I go find them, right? I was like, I want to go talk to flat earthers. Well, you talk to enough flat earthers and you're going to start getting other conspiracies. You're going to start getting young earth creationists. Facebook is going to give them to you. And then you talk to enough of those, you're going to get anti-vaxxers. You talk to enough of those, you're just going to get far right ideologies all over. And because I comment on them, Facebook constantly feeds them to me. So my Facebook feed is degenerate, right? Like I can't be on Facebook for more than like a half hour at a time because I just read through enough stuff and I'm like, I can't comment on all of them. So I've got to pick out the ones that are really important. What are the ones I haven't seen yet? What are the bigger channels that I can try to comment on or some really small ones that, maybe more people will read my actual comment. And there's a couple of people that I dogpile on pretty hard, like Mr. Matrix reference. He was a lot of fun. And I actually made a really good friend from commenting on his stuff that you're going to see on the show. If you watch the VODs of the streams, I made a really good friend in those comment sections. So it was cool. But for me, it's not about convincing them, right? I go find their stuff so that I can post on it so that when their audience reads it, they see a dissenting voice. They see that there is somebody. And it's super innocuous to just see gaming with everyone in there, right? And everyone assumes I'm like this super uneducated person, right? That I don't know any better. I'm just some soy boy who's a keyboard warrior, sucking on my Xbox controller pacifier, right? I just have these wild assumptions about me. And I love coming in with that innocuous name and to be able to be like, well, actually, did you know I'm a professional private educator for all subjects K-12 and I'm very knowledgeable about this topic. And if you understood chemistry, you know water molecules don't react that way. It's a lot of fun. So but I agree, it's rough, and if I do it too long, like my mental health will suffer. I didn't think that would happen to me because I'm pretty stoic for most things, but yeah, I will legitimately just start getting depressed at the amount of awful things I see all day, and I'll be like, I can't live like this. I gotta go to my Discord, I gotta talk to somebody, I gotta go find like you or like the Use Power or Sergeant Scholar or somebody else and go like read a post that actually agrees with me because like I'm gonna lose my mind if I have to see one more time that picture of that stupid guy in like the ridiculous clothes, me walking out, he was all proud, me walking out of the restaurant, not leaving any tip because my server gave me their pronouns. Like, what an insensitive person. Like, I just don't understand. It's awful. Like, why? And you do that enough, you see that same meme over and over and over again. I'm like, I don't have the fortitude to comment on all of these. I'm like getting more selective, but
yeah, it can be really bad for your mental health. And so I think if you're going to be an advocate for these kinds of things and you're going to speak up and you're going to put yourself out there, one of the things that you have to learn how to do is shut it off.
Yeah.
Learn how to shut it off. Go play with your kid. Get outside. Get your feet in the dirt or something, and just get away from that. Because if you really get into it too far and you start engaging too much, it can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. It can lead to sort of I think it could potentially lead to kind of a skewed view of how the world is, because if you're engaging with the sort of the fringe element all the time, it can make you start to think that the fringe element is like way bigger than it is.
Yeah, and it's not.
It's not. There are a lot of people out there that are sort of like kind of vaguely into conspiracy theories or vaguely into this kind of stuff, who don't really think about it, haven't thought critically about it. And then there's the very committed fringe edge of it. And those are the folks who are the most vocal.
Yeah. And I always have to remind myself that, like, you know, everything, when I talk about these things, when I talk to these people, you know, when we talk about things like indoctrinating your kids, that's a really small percentage of the population that's doing that. Flat earthers make up like less than 1% of the American population. There's 300 million people in America. There aren't that many flat earthers, right? You know, and they're in the thousands. They are in the thousands number, but it's not quite that big, right? It just so happens that they are so loud about it, and now creationists are a bigger percentage. I did look that up one time, and there are two major denominations, Protestantism that promote creationism, LC Mass Lutherans, which I was, and one of the Baptists does. I looked up on a Pew Research one time.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact number, so I'm not going to cite it, but they had significant amounts, and that's because they're biblical literalists, right? They want to believe that the Bible is literally true, except when it comes to the earth being flat. We're going to reject all of that, but we're going to accept the age, right? Because that's one of my favorite things, man, is going on like Answers in Genesis and stuff like that. The Answers in Genesis wrote, like, and I put them on my Discord server, they wrote 3 scathing anti-flat earth articles, and it's just so interesting to me to watch them punch down to try to lend themselves scientific legitimacy. See, we're not that crazy, but then in the Venn diagram of creationists to flat earthers, almost all flat earthers are young earth creationists, right? But
Answers in Genesis, isn't that like the Ken Ham folks?
Yeah.
Or something? Okay. Yeah. I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. He built the Ark Museum in Kentucky, which I drove past. Did you know that it had to put in an insurance claim for flood damage?
I heard about that.
It's
Isn't that wild? Even with all that modern technology.
That's my favorite, man. Yeah. Bill Nye versus Ken Ham was actually one of the starts of my deconstruction. My best friend, and then watching Bill Nye debate Ken Ham.
I saw you. Yeah, I heard you talking about that on the interview that you did with Melanie, and I thought that was fascinating because I watched that debate live.
Yeah.
I was online watching it, and I was like, yeah, this is really kind of cool. I want to see this. And at the time, I wasn't super into this kind of stuff, but I just thought it was a really interesting thing. And I'm a big Bill Nye fan, and I saw he was doing this. And so I watched it, and it was kind of pretty much what you said in that last interview, which is it was a slaughter.
It's brutal.
Wow. Bill Nye just wiped the floor with this guy. And it really kind of illustrated how poorly they've really thought through what they believe. It was so bad.
Yeah, he just woke up and chose violence that day, and it was just like, dog. And what the ironic part is, like I said there, I watched it on Answers in Genesis' channel. You know, Ken Ham has it on his YouTube channel. That's where I saw it. And the tour of the Ark Museum with Bill Nye is on his channel. And it's, you know, it's like Melanie said, it's crazy to me that clearly they think that this is some benefit to them to leave it up and not take it down, because I would have taken it down if I got spanked that hard on a debate stage.
You know, as somebody who was sort of like I didn't feel like I had a dog in that fight. I just wanted to see an interesting event. It was really clear to me what the outcome was. But what is kind of shocking is the number of people who would watch that same debate and think that Ken Ham did great.
Yep.
You know, I think it really sort of shows us how powerful those biases and predispositions are when you come into something like that and you're watching it. You know, you're gonna edit out everything you don't like, and you're gonna listen only to the parts that agree with you.
Yeah.
And you know, so sometimes I wonder if those debates are really worthwhile. But then again, I hear stories like yours where that was a big turning point for you. And it really does make me think that those kinds of events are not just interesting to watch, but probably pretty useful.
Yeah. And that's what keeps me going. Like, despite it's good to get an actual confirmation. Like, being an advocate for skepticism is really hard to do, right? Nobody likes you. right? There are people on the right that don't like me because I disagree with everything I say. It's people on the left that don't like me because I don't believe in astrology or homeopathic medicine. It's people that are like on the left where I am. I'm a leftist. And people on my own side of the political spectrum that don't like me because I'll be like, homeopathics don't work, dog. Like I don't know how to tell you this any other way. Water doesn't remember things. Pay attention in chemistry class, okay? Like, so it's like you know, when you're a skeptic, nobody likes you, right? Like, well, I shouldn't say nobody likes you, but like you can flack everywhere, right? I couldn't be part of an ideology if I wanted to because everywhere I go, I catch crap for the things that I advocate for, right? So I'm like, well, there's no evidence to that claim. I don't know how to tell you that. That's just not okay, right? Even my own family, right? Like when I say I'm like the black sheep of my family for being a naturalist. I'm like the only person in my family that is a hard naturalist, right? That like, you know, that thinks that like that just doesn't accept or supernatural explanations for anything, or doesn't accept unfalsifiable explanations for anything anymore. I just don't, because there's no utility in believing them for me. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't do anything for me anymore. And a lot of that comes from like we've been talking about like deconstruction, and I want to put another qualifier, and then I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll kind of talk about like what it's, you know, so we kind of talked about like why go out and talk about critical thinking in public, right? And there's a lot of things that kind of go against you too, especially from more religious institutions. It can be any religion will do this, but especially like apologists who will say like, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, or I don't have enough faith to believe in evolution. It's just a philosophical position just like mine. And kind of talking about like what is the difference, and then I want to talk about deconstruction, and then that'll probably wrap up our conversation today. We'll have those couple of points left. So I just want to hit like how is, you know, for the audience, right? For the people watching, when we do this, you talked about spreading the word earlier, and there are some apologists that's going to take that and be like, see, you're just as evangelical, right? They're going to go nuts on it. Like when we talk about like spreading the word of skepticism, we talk about promoting critical thinking and things like that. And I think a really good example of this is Anthony Magnabosco's street epistemology, right? Is when we go out and do these things, how is that different from proselytizing? How is that different from a faith preacher on a street corner? You know, if I'm a person on a street corner and I'm holding up a sign that says vaccines are actually perfectly safe and effective, and I hope you get one so you survive the pandemic, and there's another person on the other corner that holds up a sign that says vaccines are killing you because Bill Nye put the devil's number on a microchip in the needle. Okay, how are we different?
Yeah. So the difference is fundamental. It's in the root of what we're doing. So the difference is that if somebody's out there spreading the word of their religion, what they're doing is they are trying to convince they're trying to convince you of what to think, right? If somebody is spreading the word of skepticism and critical thinking, what we're trying to do is to get you to look closely at how you think, the process itself, the actual skills you're using. So it's not really about what conclusion you arrive at. Hopefully we all, if we're thinking critically, we all arrive at similar kinds of conclusions. That's usually how it works. But if you are an advocate for critical thinking, you're not trying to proselytize, or is it proselytize?
Proselytize, I think.
Proselytize. You're not trying to proselytize. What you're trying to do is give people the tools to reach conclusions that are reasonable. And it's about the process and the skills, not the content. And that's the fundamental difference between being an advocate for critical thinking and being an advocate for, say, a faith or a political party or some ideology of some kind. That is not really, that's about content. We are about process and skills, and that's very different.
Yeah, I super agree. So there's a couple of really good quotes that I like from this. One is from Dr. McClellan. Dan McClellan is on TikTok too. He's a great TikToker. Okay, he's awesome. And he's a Hebrew scholar and translator for the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, right? But he does a lot of really, really good objective work, and he's a very valuable contributor to the skeptic community because he kind of rejects the idea of biblical univocality, the idea that the whole Bible speaks with one voice. And it's phenomenal. I love all of his stuff. Fantastic guy. Okay, I love him. But he has this really great talking point about apologists where he says, you know, the purpose of apologetics is not to convince is not necessarily to convince people of an opinion or a claim. It is to convince those that already believe the claim they are justified in doing so, right? That they are right to do so. And it's crazy to me. So you were talking about, right, Answers to Genesis keeps that debate on their channel, right? And that there are people who are going to watch that and say, well, Ken Ham did okay, right? He was kind of punching up, but he did all right. And that's because for them, the purpose for Ken Ham, the purpose of that debate is not to convince people of his position. It is to convince his followers that they are justified in following him. To show that he's willing to go step up. And you see this with flat earth debaters too. There are some really prominent flat earth debaters that will go in debate after debate after debate and get spanked the whole time, but they keep coming back with their, yeah, whatever, bro, I got you, bro, it's not hard, bro, attitude, right? This super cocky attitude, because they're apologists. They want to convince their believers that they are justified to be so. And I agree, right? So that's those two fundamental differences. I think for someone who is proselytizing, they care about the ends and not the means. The process by which you believe that Slublop, the hippo god, is real is unimportant. What matters is that you accept him as your hippo lord and savior. Okay, that's what matters, right? And so we have this idea that for them, the ends are what's important. For us, the means are important, right? I don't want you to believe vaccines are safe because I told you they're safe. I want you to believe vaccines are safe because I know how RNA works. And I know that it goes in the cell and it produces a protein, and the protein sticks to the outsides of the cell. And then the body goes, oh, there's these weird spike proteins on the outside of the cell. We probably want to kill those. And then it makes T cells and antibodies that do that, and then it learns how to kill them. And then when you get coronavirus, it already knows what the shape of the coronavirus is, and so it can go kill it. And there's a whole reasonable expectation. And then it doesn't change your DNA because we don't have to alter your DNA. We put an RNA in you that's already coded to make the protein. It just collects amino acids and then makes it. And then it forges it in your own cells. And yeah, okay, maybe your body eats a couple of your own cells in a place, and you feel a little sick because your body thinks you have a horrible, debilitating illness. You feel sick despite not actually being sick, right? And yeah, you're going to get sore where the injection site is because your body's inflaming the area because it thinks you have a horrible, debilitating illness. You're training your body to fight disease, and that's why vaccines work. That's why they're effective and they're safe, because even if I give you a vaccine with live virus, it's dead. Or with a virus in it, it's dead virus. And even if a little bit of the virus survives, you get a little tiny bit sick instead of really sick when you get the flu every year. Okay, so pay attention. So, like, the point is that I want you to pay attention and learn. And for the audience, Dr. Dad wants you to pay attention and learn. Okay, we want you to learn things and come to the same conclusion, because the other really great quote that I like comes from, or I heard it from Aaron Ra, is that truth converges. When you have good thinking skills, when you're looking for the truth, you will converge on one fact, and that will be the fact. And that's it. That's it. Yep. When you're not, you're going to disperse. That's why there is one scientific consensus on whether or not vaccines work and what counts as medicine, and many different ideas on what home remedies work. Mm-hmm. Right? There are very few universal home remedies that work on all things. And the ones that do, guess what? We know the chemistry for why they work. Right? and then they became medicine. Yeah. So and then my other favorite, I love when Melanie says, what do we call alternative medicine that works? Medicine. Right. I love that. Right. So, like, the truth converges. That's the point. And that difference in the thinking totally matters. And so, again, to put another qualifier in this, right, we don't, because I neglected to do this last time. We don't disparage everybody who's part of a faith or has a faith or a belief system. That's fine. Okay. There's a very, at the very least, I don't. But, like, we don't, right? In general, I don't think. I don't think that's the case, Dr. Dad. Am I correct? Yes.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. I think it's very important not to do that, because,
right.
Well, if for anything, the research shows that if you are disparaging the person that you're trying to convince, you won't convince them. Right. You really have to meet people where they're at and let them know that they matter.
And so I want to be sure that you in the audience, if you're watching, that you understand that no one judges you or looks down on you for having the faith you have. There was a I'll give you an example. So there was a debate I watched between Flat Earther Witsit and PhD Tony, who's a seismologist. He's a doctor of seismology. And then they had an after show on MC Toon's channel, and I went there. And Witsit, who had to leave the debate in relatively short order, showed up on that live stream then for hours, and he was continuing to debate them afterward. And they were both pretty biting back and forth to each other, which is fair, but mostly because Witsit has a super cocky dude bro attitude about everything that he believes that he's wrong about. And one of the things that was really striking is, as Witsit was kind of exiting, he kind of made this slam against Toon about you know that your chat is full of all these atheists, right? And they're laughing at you for being a Christian. They're laughing at you for being a believer. You know they do that, right? And then he left, and everybody went into Toon's chat, and we were like, no, we don't. We super respect you, okay? Absolutely. And Tony was on the chat. He was like, I don't. We respect you. We respect what you do. Because when we talk about deconstruction, and we talk about how deconstruction works with faith, right? There's this idea, and this is kind of the last point that we'll touch on, and then we'll be all done today. There's this idea that deconstruction means abandoning all of the things you believe, and it means tearing them all down and not believing in anything anymore, things like that. And that's not necessarily the case, right? You've mentioned to me that you think deconstruction is at its heart kind of a process of awakening to critical thinking, and I tend to agree, right? And so that the audience understands, is it possible for a person of faith to have critical thinking skills?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because the thing is that, I know a lot of people who are deeply religious, who are also great scientists, and who are very, very well educated in a lot of ways. I know people who believe some things that I would consider to be a little bit supernatural or paranormal, and they also are great at thinking critically. Who do things that take some serious critical thinking skills. The thing about it is that most of us, what we do is we apply our critical thinking skills in certain areas of our life. So we will apply it at work, we will apply it in our academic work, we'll apply it in certain areas, but not in others. And I think what happens for a lot of people, this is my personal opinion, I'm not an expert on this, but my personal opinion is that a lot of people who are very religious have basically sort of cordoned off a part of their thinking, a part of their beliefs and a part of kind of who they are. And in that area, they don't apply the critical thinking because it's maybe a little terrifying to do something like that. But I think when someone's going through a deconstruction, what's happening is they're taking the same critical thinking skills that they would be using to evaluate what medicine to take or what to do when they're buying new car insurance. The same critical thinking skills you use in your daily life for a lot of things, you start to apply those to these very sensitive areas. And for some people, it takes years, maybe never at all, before they're comfortable doing that. But I think that once you start to do that, you find that you're really good at it because you're good at it in all kinds of areas of your life. And it can take years to do that. But for some people, it happens all at once. They just start putting those critical thinking skills to use in that part of their life. And it falls like a house of cards pretty fast. It can take years to process that and to figure out what to do with that. But I really do believe it's a process of awakening to critical thinking in that particular part of your life.
Yeah. And I think that there is a good amount of, because you can find examples of people who deconstruct and then they come out and then they are aggressively vocal against what they deconstructed from. And you can see this all over places like TikTok, for example, where there are lots of creators who just, they make 3-minute videos talking about, here's a thing I used to believe and here's why I don't believe it anymore, and this is why I think it's wrong and dangerous and harmful. And they can get really aggressive about that. And I think from a psychologist perspective, I'd like to have this, but your opinion on this, it's understandable to have some aggressive feelings if you feel like you've been lied to your whole life about things, or you feel like that you bought into a narrative that's potentially harmful or dangerous or caused you to look down on others in an unjust way, and then to come out of that and have a lot of self feelings of regret and guilt, right? Where for a lot of me being a public figure talking about this, that's for me, right? I want to make up for all of the horrible things I used to say, which weren't too terrible. I was very much a progressive Christian when I was a Christian, but there were some times where I had that, the love the sin or hate the sin attitude for queer people, for example, things like that, where I look back on how I kind of used to feel about those sort of things, and I think back and I go, man, if I could just change that, if I could have given myself those skills earlier. And I don't want anyone to do what I did. I don't want anyone to end up being like I did, to end up feeling like super progressive, but then like having these things, it's like, but that's just not okay. You can't do anything with that. And I think for a lot of people, that's speaking out as them reconciling with, I don't know if trauma is too strong of a word, but for some people it is legitimate trauma if they came out of things like Jehovah's Witness cults and stuff like that.
I think in my extended family, there's intergenerational trauma from that cult. It's definitely trauma is a good word for it.
Yeah. So when we... Oh, go ahead. Finish.
And I would just say, like, anger is totally a legitimate response to that.
Yeah.
Okay. And
so I think when we talk about like deconstruction and thinking critically and things like that, there's a lot of lashback against, well, you're justifying all these like hateful people or whatever. No. These people are hateful and angry because they feel like their entire world came crumbling down around them and no one gave them a good foundation to stand on. No one taught them how to properly regulate their beliefs and their emotions and things that they're dealing with. And so they're teaching you. They're just teaching you in the way they know how and in with the emotions that they legitimately feel. And what you ought to do is turn around and say, oh my God, why would my faith ever make a person feel that way? Is the correct, to me, the appropriate response to a person who leaves your faith and is angry about it. You ought to turn around and go, wait a minute, how did I mess up? Okay, to make you feel that way. That's bananas, right? But like, I just want to be clear, like, it is very possible to be a good critical thinker and accept that you have an unfalsifiable belief that you like to hold on to. But critical thinkers accept that the belief is unfalsifiable. It may not necessarily be informative to our everyday life, and we probably ought not base things like laws on it, which is why we understand that we have a separation of church and state, right? And they abandon phrases like, God works in mysterious ways. Like part of deconstruction is abandoning thought-stopping phrases like God works in mysterious ways. There's just no way for us to know. Ask him when you die. I can't ask anyone anything when I'm dead. I'm dead. And it's not like I can go ask you and come back down here and teach you, right? So we might as well analyze this now. Is this a problem now?
Time to think critically is now.
Yeah, it is. And the time to hold our beliefs accountable, right? If you believe in a God or gods, hold them accountable for the things that they do. And take what's good out of that philosophy and bring it with you, and take what's bad out of that philosophy and reject it, right? Yeah. We talked about how like letting one pseudoscientific belief in is like the gremlins, right? You feed one after midnight and it multiplies and it goes everywhere. It goes nutso. And then they start chewing up all your furniture and burning your house down, okay? Yeah. Thinking critically is like responsibly taking care of one mogwai. Right? Yeah. And not letting him turn into the gremlin, okay? And if you do that, if you nurture that, okay, you can do that. That's very doable. And that's not necessarily incompatible with deconstruction, where you can think critically about the things you believe and not blindly accept everything that you're told by your spiritual leaders. I think that's
good. I think that also there's like, for a lot of people that are religious and are also good critical thinkers, I think for a lot of those folks, what's really going on for them is not that they actually sincerely believe many of the things that are in their, like the supernatural things. They probably don't even think about it very much. But what's happening is I think they're getting their psychological needs met by the community. Yeah. They have the sense of belonging, and they have the sense of connection, autonomy and empowerment, and there's people there for them, and they have a sense of meaning, and they have traditions and rituals that mark the passages of time and the events in their lives, and they feel connected. And all of that can be very powerful, and you might not want to give any of that up. And I totally get that. Those are legitimate psychological needs. Yeah. And so like going in and just trashing your your religious beliefs with critical thinking, just really going in with a laser on that. For some people, they might not be ready for anything like that. And until they are, I wouldn't say, this has to happen. What I would say is, are you in a safe place, in terms of your life to be really getting into this and ready to deconstruct? I've had people in therapy going through deconstruction, and it can be a really scary thing to do it. And for those who are going through it and are terrified of what they're experiencing, once they've sort of begun the process, just know that there's still community, there's still belonging, there's still all of those psychological needs can be met with the world around you. You just have to find it in new and different ways. Yeah.
And I think that's why I like that's why I favor that street epistemology. Right. We talked about beforehand. We're both big fans of that. And I think that process of just non-confrontationally asking questions to make sure your epistemology is good will teach you the skills, and you'll come to those conclusions on your own over time. I had a Facebook conversation with one of the followers of, I call him Mr. Matrix Reference. So I was having a conversation with one of his followers about on a post about giants. He showed pictures of there's a mountain in Antarctica that kind of looks like a pyramid because it's been eroded by the wind. And he said, there are giants in there. And I said, well, you have no evidence to support this claim. Right? You have no evidence of that. You've never been there. You haven't taken any pictures of it. No one else has either. Like, show it to me. And it's one small mountain on the end of a giant mountain range. It's not like a big structure built in the middle of wherever, right? It's a mountain. And there are other mountains there, of course. So I was just like, you have no evidence for this claim. And then I kind of went back and forth with this other follower of his about it for a while. And the follower said, okay, well, Mr. Smarty McSmarty Pants, if you're such a Smarty McSmarty Pants, prove to me the giants aren't real. And I was like, well, that's proving a negative. You can't ask me to do that, right? You can't shift the burden of proof to me like that. You're making the positive claim that these rocks that you think have faces on them are giants. I said that doesn't make sense, because if they are and they're going to come back and destroy the world one day, why don't we just blow them all up with TNT, right? Like, just blow all the giant faces up and then they're all dead and we don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay? Like, what are you talking about? And clearly he hadn't thought that far through his schema, right? Like, well, could I prevent this problem before it starts? And I said, you can't just shift that burden to me. You can't make me prove giants aren't real. You have to prove that the giants are real first. And he said, well, that's ridiculous, because by that logic, God's not real either. And I said, that's a fair bit of critical thinking you just did there.
I was about to say, yeah.
Now,
something there.
That's not the conclusion you have to come to, but that's a good piece of critical thinking you just did. Well, hang on, wait a minute. Clearly, I have no foundation for my belief in God either. Right? Like, it went off the rail. Doing things like street epistemology, even being non-confrontational, I think that sometimes there are risks associated with that for people like you and me and Melanie and Anthony and, those of us in the skeptic community that do that. We catch a lot of flack. We have troubles to our own mental health from engaging with this all the time. Do you think there are any other professional or personal risks? And then we'll close it out.
Yeah, I mean, the personal risk really is exactly what you were saying, which is there's this potential risk to your own mental health if you're engaging with this stuff all the time. I mean, I think if you're engaging it from the perspective of a skeptic and you're engaging with it from the perspective of, I want to make change, I want to be an educator, I want to help people, then that gives you some resiliency. But there's still that risk, because the people that are very, very into these conspiracy theories and hoaxes and, this kind of thing can be very nasty. So there's that kind of personal risk. But then the professional risk is, as a psychologist, there's all of this potential professional risk in that, like if you have a private practice, for example, and you're in, say, a mid-sized to small town, and you're like the open skeptic, right? When parents find out about that, they become very, very wary of bringing their kids, because I'm going to indoctrinate them into my woke ideology.
You can give them woke lib ideologies.
Exactly. So there's this potential pitfall there, but you just have to weigh that against the reality of the world we're in. The reality is we need people to speak up. We really do. We need people who are motivated and understand this kind of thing to say something. And if we don't have folks like you saying things and just being out there and talking about this and making it an issue that's put in front of people who might find it and might discover something, then, people are going to really miss out. There's a potential that we could change some lives. And if we don't do anything, that's almost as bad as the potential pitfall of maybe losing some customers in my private practice.
Yeah. What is that? I forget who says it. The only thing that's necessary for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing,
Yeah.
It's important. And I don't want to make anyone feel like they're obligated to speak out, but I feel like it for that reason, right? If I have the aptitude and the ability, I ought to. And my good friend Deep Fried Vegan is his name. He's we agree on that. So, yeah, it's awesome, right? Deep Fried Vegan. My little joke for him on my channel is hope you tasted delicious, buddy. And then but me and Deep Fried, we think we kind of have that agree. I don't think that anyone necessarily has to be super obligated to do that, but he does. And he's like, if you have the ability, you ought to speak out. It's a moral good, and I think it is a moral good. I wouldn't force anyone to do what I do. I wouldn't force anyone to put themselves in the position that I'm in or that you're in, because it's hard. It is hard to do this, and it is difficult to be here and be this kind of person, and you don't get a lot of clout for it. It's very difficult to grow a channel like ours when you're promoting these sorts of things, even though there are less of us, right? There are less of us than there are of extremists that are public figures, right?
It's crazy to me, like how much money and fame you can get by just selling some quack remedy or pitching some wild conspiracy, or people can get fabulously wealthy. Yeah. And being a public skeptic and critical thinker is not the path to riches.
It's not like I can't and you know what? I don't necessarily expect it. If I do, that's great. If people like what I do and they want to come support my show and they want to come sub to me on Twitch and they want to come like me on YouTube and give me likes on TikTok and support us online and all the other places we are, that's awesome. But we don't expect it. But hey, if you do like what we do and you do like the conversation that we had, I'm going to get off my now that I've got your emotions, right? I'm emotionally manipulating the audience now that I've got them feeling sorry for us. Now that you feel really bad for us, if you want to come support us online, please come do that, okay? Please come find us. Feel free to check out my channel, Gaming with Everyone, and check out my channel here on YouTube with everyone. And if you like what we do and you want to see us. If you like what we do and you want to see us continue to do it, then please support us. Give us likes, give us follows. You can find Dr. Dad over on all of the places he doesn't know, but I'm going to make him tell the audience where to find all of his stuff. So I'm putting you on the spot, Dr. Dad. So please tell the audience how they can go find you and support you to help you continue what you're doing too.
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is to go to my website, which is www.raisingaskepticalkid.com. If you go there, there's links to everything else. And the other place you can find me where I'm most active is on my Facebook page, which is, Raising a Skeptical Kid. But if you just go and you start looking for Dr. Dad, you'll find me there. Facebook, the website, and you can also find my books, The Beyond Belief and Pixel's Big Books. Those two will hopefully help you or your kid. Yeah,
it's phenomenal stuff. Thanks so much, Ron, for being here. It's been phenomenal. I know you got to go, so I'm going to let you go because I'll talk to you all day, dog, about just everything. It's been a ton of fun. Man, it's been really good.
We didn't even mention I'm on the other side of the planet from you.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's my daytime. You're over there on
it's the middle of the night here.
So I'm gonna let you go, man, because I know you gotta get to bed. You got life to get to, dog. It's been a ton of fun, dude. Thank you so very much. Right, I've been squealing fangirl all week. I'm like, oh my god, talk to psychologist. So cool. No, Tom, no problem, dude. Thank you for coming on to me. Like, I feel so humbled whenever I get to have a conversation like these. I'm like, here's me, going out there punching way above my pay grade, right? I have like no credentials to support any of these things that I do. Despite all the education I have, I just have a lot of I have an unfinished degree, but I have like no like official credentials to support any of this I do. I'm just like some guy who like wanted to make a gaming channel, and then I wanted to promote education on my gaming channel, and now I get to talk to cool skeptics like you and like Melanie, and hopefully way more. And I just can't believe that would happen, and that like, I could be so graced in that way. Like it's so cool. Like dream come true for me. So like it's awesome. And so you deserve it, man. You deserve all the fanfare and all the hype. And everybody please go check out Dr. Dad and check out Ron on his website, and just give him all the hype and all the love that you can. If you're part of our community here at Gaming with Everyone, you're watching this, please go show him the most love that you can. And if you have the means, go support him by buying his books, because they truly are awesome and they truly are wonderful. I just can't, right? Like it's so cool. So please go definitely check them out. Please go definitely support him as much as you're able to. And if you're not, just give him some likes on some of his stuff. Find on Facebook, give him a few likes there. Give this video some likes so that it can spread and more people can go find his stuff. Whatever way you can, that would be awesome. We love you here. Remember that at Gaming with Everyone, you're welcome here just the way you are. But we super care for and appreciate everybody from all walks of life, because everyone deserves to build connections. And that's the whole point of Gaming with Everyone. We build connections that bring people together with games and gaming. If you want to come on, Ron, and play some games, we're happy to do that, okay? I'd love to have you on for it. It'd be a ton of fun, man, because we're all D&D nerds. So
I'm all about the D&D.
So if you ever have some time, you want to come on and talk some D&D stuff, man, we'll do it, okay? Because I believe my philosophy in my channel is that gaming with everyone, gaming with people is a way you can bring people together. We can connect and bond over something we mutually share, and then we can enjoy friendships that way. And some of the best friends I've ever made, I made playing Magic the Gathering and D&D and games online. So that's what we do here. And our motto, Dr. Dad, if you don't know, okay, it goes like this, all right? Don't hate, don't discriminate, love forever, and play together. Good night, everyone.
Good night.